Hello, it is Monday, June 25th. I want to welcome you to Let's Talk Native on the LTN Radio Network. This program breaks all the rules for Native radio. No buffalo speeches, no mystic healing, no special Indian prayers. We tackle the real issues facing Native people. We look back at our glorious and our grave history, a tough look at where we're at now, and look forward to our ongoing battles for autonomy and our free and independent existence. Let's Talk Native is produced in association with Iroquois Promotions on the LTN Radio Network, streaming live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Sanger Nation and simulcast on the Gwe. Hey, that's CKWE in Tenega. You can find us at let me try pulling a mic. You can find us at www.ltnradionet.com. I can't believe I just did that whole opening. I never pulled the mic up to me. I must really think my voice carries. I'm John Kane. I'm the show's host and producer and technically challenged, apparently. I want to thank our studio engineer, Kelly McMillan, and I want to thank Jake for pointing out that I hadn't pulled the mic down yet. All right. Hey, I've got a good show planned for today in spite of how I opened. I've been watching a lot of what's been playing out in the news. That isn't necessarily a Native issue, okay? This idea that Sarah Huckabee Sanders walked into a restaurant and then got thrown out because they knew who she was and they said, no, you're not welcome here. And apparently there were two other instances of people within the Trump administration who got something more than just a cold shoulder, apparently, as they are recognized. I even saw a piece in one of, I think it might have been the Washington Post, that said single people who are working in the Trump administration, and obviously they mean white people because only white people work in the Trump administration, are having a hard time dating in Washington because because nobody wants anything to do with these people. So yeah, one of the I guess the impacts of all this has been, what are the people on the left say? And among those voices, and probably the most, I guess the voice that got played over and over again was Maxine Waters and she was saying how, yes, these people need to be held accountable, and there should be protests at every time they show up at a restaurant or every time they show up in public. And many, and I would say almost most, if not all of the others on the left, all the leaders in the Democratic Party and everything else, condemned her statement. And they disavowed that statement. They said, no, we need to show grace and dignity and civility. We need to take the higher ground. You know that expression, higher ground? I always like that one because people make it sound like, oh, taking the higher ground is like to be nice. You know what the higher ground, that reference has to do with being able to have a military advantage over somebody, to be able to shoot like crabs and fish in a bucket, I guess, or fish in a barrel. Yeah. So anyway, the what we keep hearing from, this was all over NPR. I listened to this all day, and I kept hearing, commentators, hosts, guests, editors, people all over, all ends, parts of the media. I was hearing people say, oh, no, we've got to show more grace than the people on the right. And I'm saying, the hell with that. And then I actually heard one of the commentators, I wouldn't say which one, because I listened to a variety of different shows. And I heard one commentator goes, no, I always thought the way to solve these problems was to simply vote. Well, you know my feeling on voting, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit today. But before I get there, let's be honest about something. If you are a terrible person, there should be consequences for your behavior. So if you're a terrible person, and if you work for Donald Trump, you're probably a terrible person, especially if you're lying for him, if you're trying to validate or normalize racism, if you're trying to justify what this moron does on a daily basis. Look, if you're waving a Confederate flag because you're a white supremacist, look, there should be consequences for that. And your next door neighbor, and look, I live on the Cattaraugus territory of the Sanger Nation. I only have to go a mile away from my house to see a Confederate flag hanging on somebody's house. And not just one. I mean, even in Western New York, there are plenty of white people hanging this symbol of white supremacy on outside their house. And they can talk about Southern pride and all of the crap, but give some pressure. There was one right in front of the school, the school that my kids went to, just down. As soon as I come down off the hill where I live on the Cattaraugus territory, the school is right there. And there was one house that was hanging a Confederate flag. You know what I did? I took pictures of it and I posted it all over Facebook. I said, look, this isn't Alabama. This isn't Mississippi. This is Gowanda, New York. Welcome to Gowanda, New York, where there's advocates for racial superiority right in front of the school. Look, I probably didn't change the guy's attitude, but a week later the flag was down. So my point is, let's shame these people. Let there be consequences. Let Sarah Huckabee Sanders be thrown out of a restaurant. I mean, nobody seemed to have a problem when the courts upheld a baker saying that a gay person couldn't have that they could deny service to somebody simply because they're gay, not because of any action that they actually did, just because of their gender preferences. I mean, nobody has to witness any of that stuff or anything else, but because the couple is gay, a baker could say, "No, I don't have to serve you." Well, you know what? Either does a restaurateur have to serve the likes of Sarah Huckabee Sanders or Donald Trump or anybody else. And I say, make as much noise as possible. Look, I mean, Noam Chomsky says, look, if you are experiencing injustice, the way to correct that isn't to be silent about it. It's to scream to the top of your lungs. So all of you, and again, I don't even like to use wimps or any of that other stuff, but all of you folks on the left who think somehow the game has to be played nicer by you on the left, that's why the Republicans have the House and the Senate and the presidency, and now have tipped the scales in the Supreme Court. Because you folks don't even know how to do this game. I mean, and look, I'm not advocating for the Democrats and just condemning the Republicans. I think they're wrong on both sides. There's, like I said before, racism isn't a right thing; it's a white thing, and there are plenty of white people in the Democratic Party. But as long as you're going to have people who say, "Oh no, we can't be hard on people who are just simply doing their job." No, they're doing their job badly. They are doing terrible things to children. They are doing terribly racist things to. We had another kid get killed just a couple of days ago in Pittsburgh, shot by police. Innocent kid. And you know what? They're going to keep justifying this stuff. And those on the right are the ones who justify it the most. They're going to justify, police violence, because all they're going to say is, "Oh yeah, but they thought they were in jeopardy. They feared. They had fear." Well, I'll tell you, white people are fearing a lot. My friend Michael Harriot, who wrote a piece in the Root last week that I posted up some of one of the quotes for, his column said white people are cowards, and what he starts off with is, "I thought white people were evil." He says, "It turns out they're not. They're just cowards." And what he was really trying to do is shame white people for not taking a stand on injustice, on racism, on so many of these other issues that demonstrate themselves on a daily basis. And if you think the solution is to go into a voting booth to vote your way out of the trouble that the United States is in, or that the people are in, I should say, I'm sorry, that's just wrong. What are you going to vote for? You think Hillary Clinton was that much better a choice than Donald Trump? Well, maybe she was on some social issues, but she wasn't going to be any better when it came to things like war and pandering to the wealthy, right? That's what she does every single day. Look, you cannot fix the ills that you're experiencing every single day. You're not going to fix racism by voting. And you know what? You're not going to fix it by praying for solutions either. So people better figure out what actions, and I don't mean going to a voting booth once every 2 or every 4 years either, or 8, or whatever finally gets you motivated to do that. Look, I'm not a big fan of voting for solutions. For one thing, where the vote is really pressed is on national offices. I mean, people forget that there is stuff that impacts you locally every single day. And you know what? If Sarah Huckabee Sanders comes into a restaurant someplace near where you live, then by all means go down there and make her life hell. I'm not saying you need to ridicule her looks or put her in any danger, but let her feel uncomfortable. Let her know that there's consequences for the actions that she participates in. I mean, it's mind-boggling to me to listen to how soft everybody thinks they should be when children are being ripped from their parents. I ran some stats off of a couple of articles on just the disproportionate amount of people of color who are in prisons. In fact, even in Canada, young people are imprisoned. The youth population in prison is almost 50%. It's 46%. 46% of youth incarceration in Canada are Native people. They represent less than 8% of the population, yet 46%. Well, why the hell do you think that is? I mean, are Native people genetically criminals? I mean, that's what they try to say about black people. That's why black people fill the prison systems in the U.S. I mean, there just has to be a stronger effort put forward. I mean, I talked about Michael Harriot's quote in the piece that he did, where he's, and I'm going to paraphrase. I don't have it written down right in front of me here. Maybe I do. But what he suggested was that if you are white and let me see where. No, I don't have it here. If you're white and you're silent on issues of racism, you may not be planting the seed of racism, but your silence provides sunlight for that seed to blossom. That's the bottom line. If your silence allows racism to continue, and not only does it allow it to continue in just an indirect or in a distant way, if you're not confronting that in your own household, your children are already being led that way. I've talked about the doll test. I've talked about all these other things, indications that even very young people are being influenced in terms of what they regard as a dangerous person, what they regard as good versus evil, and how black people and people of color are already being designated as the other, as the evil, as the wrongdoers, while white people are the good people. White people are the beautiful people. Well, if your silence is so deafening that your own children are adopting, and look, this has to do with black people too, people of color as well. The one thing that doll test indicated was that even black children felt at an early age, almost preschool, I mean, just entering school age, they have already been conditioned to believe that white people are better than black people. Better. More good. More beautiful. That's what that doll test has indicated. Now, I'm not saying that we as parents in our homes are feeding that to our kids, but we're not making enough conversation about these issues to offset the impacts that society is already having. So again, if you're silent on racism, if you're silent on bigotry, then you're allowing that racism and bigotry to grow even within your family. If you happen to brush up against, somebody, a public figure, a person who is living off of tax dollars, if you brush up against somebody on the subway or in a restaurant and you feel like that you need to be more civil, or you need to show more grace or take the higher ground and not say something. Look, if you're a public figure and you can take praise in public, then you can take criticism in public. And, to hell with all these people who say, oh, no, let's be nice. They're just doing a job. No, they aren't. They have compromised all of us. And I'm not an American. They're not my elected officials. They're not serving me as in their roles as public servants, but they're impacting me. We need to do all that we can. We need to confront this stuff, and we need to confront this stuff with as many people as possible. And I don't mean just it isn't just an us, people of color against them, white people. No, we are never going to affect change in the dominant society if we don't peel off some of that dominant society. And when I say peel off, I mean if we don't get white people, if we don't shame white people into taking a stand against injustice, then the injustice will continue. If we don't tap in to those who actually have white privilege to use that privilege for good, then that privilege will continue. And it won't continue for us. This is the whole point. Now, and for those of you who think, okay, well, the solution is going to the voting booth. Look, if you're a part of the American electorate, by all means, go to the voting booth. But if you think the solution is to vote for somebody who you think can win, and to vote for the lesser of two evils, so somebody who's not as bad as if the choices are bad or worse, and so you're going to vote for bad. Anybody who says that about Donald Trump, well, all those people who didn't like Hillary Clinton, see what you got Donald Trump. You know what happened in that last election? The Democratic Party should have realized they put a crappy candidate up, but they're going to do it again. So I mean, is Donald Trump, whose approval ratings are so low, I mean, he doesn't really even have Republicans in his corner. They just won't go against him because they're Republicans. They're party loyalists. Their loyalties are not to other quote unquote Americans. Their loyalties are to the ideology that party designation represents. The solution isn't to vote your way out of this stuff, and I'll talk about all that is wrong with Native people getting sucked into this stuff, and I'll do that after the break at the bottom of the hour. But again, even to you white folks out there, and to you black folks out there, all you people who are trying to become a significant part of voting bloc to affect change. That's not where change happens. Change doesn't happen by trying to vote out Andrew Cuomo or Charles Schumer or Kirsten Gillibrand. That's not where the change is going to happen. Those are just faces all doing the same thing. The change happens next to you, where you live. What are you doing on a daily basis to affect change? I mean, you think you can just go step into a voting booth every 2 years and you're going to affect change? Well, how's that gone so far? Oh, yeah, look, slavery ended. You think slavery ended because the right people got voted in? Do you think the Civil Rights Act or the Civil Rights Movement, you think that change happened because better candidates ran? Really? You don't think marches and demonstrations? I mean, the most meaningful demonstrations of the civil rights era had to do with sitting at a lunch counter and not sitting in the back of a bus, for crying out loud. That sounds like little stuff, right? No, it wasn't little stuff. It was big stuff. And for all of you who thought, okay, well, we'll file suit against the Dakota Access Pipeline, and then we're going to sit around, we're going to pray about it. Well, how'd that work out? You know, how'd your lawsuits? How did your President Obama work out? How did your local elected official Dave Archambault? How'd that work out? The pipeline got built, and it's already leaked some oil here and there. In the meantime, we've got bomb trains derailing and leaking, oil into rivers. I mean, it doesn't change because we think that there's a nice way to fight these battles. We're being convinced every single. Oh no, there's a way to deal with that stuff. Yeah, I'll tell you there's a way to deal with it. You got to raise hell. Yeah, look, nobody really tried to stop the pipeline. Well, I take it back. A few people did some things. I heard some piece of equipment might have caught on fire somehow. A few people chained themselves to to an excavator here or there. But was there really any effort, any physical resistance to stop this pipeline? Other than the stuff that was done for the cameras? We've got to do more. Look, I think it's great that the Seneca people came together with people from Western New York and people from Pennsylvania to stand up to this idea of the Coudersport Area Municipal Authority taking hydrofracked wastewater into their wastewater treatment facility, which would ultimately discharge into the Allegheny River. I think it's great that the people stepped up and utilized a civil process, I guess. Not a lawsuit, but showed up. But they took action. They physically went there and offered resistance. That's what I'm talking about. I mean, if you sat back and hoped you could vote for somebody that was going to change that, you think Kathy Young was going to change that down there in the Southern Tier? Look, she was one of the people who were standing with the folks. But the fact that there were people involved in this thing is why it changed. Look, folks, prayers and votes aren't going to get it done. You know, and I will say, at least prayers aren't damaging. They aren't functional. But there is a downside to voting, because what you're being told to do is to vote for the lesser of two evils. So you validate the process. And in fact, it doesn't matter who wins. If you voted in that system, then you validated the system. I mean, I've talked about what Dr. Nawal El-Saadawi had one of her quotes where she expressed that democracy cannot coexist with capitalism and religion. And I've talked about this for several shows in a row, because the more I think about that expression, that quote, or that opinion, and how it plays out every single day. I mean, money buys elections. The folks who you get to vote for have already been financed to be the person that you're voting for. You didn't have any say in that. I mean, you really didn't have any say in that. I mean, even if you did participate in the primaries and the early parts of the election, even then the die's been cast before you get to cast a vote. I mean, it's been papered over with dollar bills the whole way. And of course, the same thing with legislation. You think that a grassroots movement is really going to change law? Do you realize what you're competing against? You're competing against moneyed interests who are throwing dollars at politicians on a daily basis. I mean, the vast majority of American people, U.S. citizens, I should say, I shouldn't even call them Americans, but U.S. citizens, absolutely oppose this attack on this whole net neutrality issue. But it's moneyed interests that won the day here. These elected officials, they weren't accountable to you. It didn't matter what the percentage of the breakdown on the polls were. What mattered was how much money was coming into their political action committees. You don't have a chance against moneyed interests. Look, there's a few things that'll go your way that aren't going to cost the aristocracy too much money. And every once in a while, the interest of the elite lines up with your interest, or at least some of the elite. So then all of a sudden you can say, "Oh yeah, I support that party." I mean, I got to remind you that there are plenty of Democrats who supported the Keystone XL pipeline. Hillary Clinton calls these the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Keystone XL pipeline, she called those federal infrastructure projects. Oh, you thought federal infrastructure projects were the roads out in front of your house. No. They are pipelines carrying oil for the oil industry. They are pipelines carrying natural gas for the gas industry. That's what federal infrastructure. Or it's a wall that's going to seal off the southern border. I mean, it's funny because you notice that Canadians can come back and forth across that border. on the north side, not any problems. It's only brown people that seem to have trouble at the borders. But this is what people don't understand is that you can't affect the change you think you can affect with an election. What you've got to do is you got to change the people who are in office, and whoever gets in there, however they get in there. But you got to affect the people closest to you first. You got to change your town, or you got to assert things in your family. You got to assert things in your community. You got to change your town. You've got to change, affect the county that you're in before you can start trying to tackle these figures in Albany or in Washington. If you haven't addressed anything locally, if you're not doing anything to change your life immediately around you, then you're shooting for the stars when you're talking about the governor or the president. I mean, this is just the reality of life, folks. We have got to do more locally. We've just got to do more locally, because if we think that changing a couple of names or faces, look, I go back to our expression for the president of the United States, "Run the Gaius." That word, we called George Washington that name, and it didn't automatically mean the president of the United States. It meant that president of the United States. But then the next one, and the one after him, and the one after him, and the one after him. So Adams, Jefferson, Jackson, Lincoln, every one of them, they did the same thing. It didn't matter which party. Barack Obama proposed the Dakota Access Pipeline, folks. Did you forget that? Bill Clinton did more to lock up people of color than any other president. The crime bill? Look, if you don't understand that these people do not have your interest at heart, and I say this to the average person, I'm not even talking about the native people. I'll get into that a little bit after the break here. I'm going to go through it again, because if you're native and you're being sucked into this idea of voting, or worse yet, running for office, look, I know, we got some beautiful native women running for offices. We've got, Paulette Jordan, who's going to run for the governor of Idaho. Look, I hope she wins. Only because if she doesn't win, then the alternative is probably going to be worse. But the likelihood of her winning is pretty slim. Now, but Deb Haaland, she's got a great chance of becoming the first Native American congresswoman out of New Mexico. So who's she going to serve? I'll get into that more after the break here. But look, we need people within our communities to step up, not to leave us behind because there's greener grass, working in that system than our own. Half the time, we've allowed our own systems to just deteriorate. And when I say, I mean traditional systems, to the extent that we've been so assimilated through the Indian Reorganization Act or the Citizenship Act of 1924, we've allowed ourselves to be so manipulated. And so now we think the solution, let's get a native governor, let's get a native congressman or a native senator, or how about a native president? Well, like I said, look up Charles Curtis if you want to see what happens when somebody really has success and gets to the heartbeat away from the presidency. He was the vice president of the United States. Didn't really work out very well for native people with Charles Curtis in office, by the way. All right, hey, we're at the bottom of the hour. We'll take a break, and when we come back, I'll get into this a little bit, again, more specifically, why native people, especially native people living on native territories, should never vote in the non-native elections. We'll talk about that when we come back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native.
If I'm knocking on the front door, don't need no third degree.
right, thanks for coming back. Hey, let me go through my sponsors. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses, Eric White and ERW Enterprises, Legacy 420 in Tandanega, Mike General with Mikey G's and Mikey's Emporium, and I want to thank individual friends like Ed Schindler and Cynthia Trice and Roger Jock, Neville Spring, and many others who have helped this program continue to educate, entertain, and inform for the last 8 years. I thank all of you for joining in the fight and doing your part. I also want to thank Unity Stream and Apache Radio Net for providing our streaming. And I want to thank again CKWE for the simulcast and the rebroadcast of the show, as well as our internet partners, Netroots Radio, Real People's Media, Indigenous Resistance Radio. I want to thank all of you for carrying Let's Talk Native on your networks. Look, I also want to thank those of you who have group pages that allow me or others, my wife Brenda in particular, but others, to post the Facebook streams of this show on your group pages. It really does allow us to to access a lot more people to hear the opinions expressed here. Now, the one thing I will say is if you don't agree with the opinion that I express here, that's okay. I'm not trying to beat people up, but I am offering my thoughts because I think there are things that are not thought all the way through, and it's easy to get sucked along with marketing campaigns and propaganda and that kind of stuff. So that's why this whole idea of voting is something that I feel pretty strongly about. Before I get to that, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we're kind of in the anniversary of a historic event from 1876, and that is when General George Armstrong Custer met his final day trying to attack the Lakota at Little Bighorn. Look, it was to put that in perspective, I think people don't understand who Custer was. This is a guy who had presidential aspirations. He honestly thought he was going to go through and wipe out a bunch of the Lakota, and he was going to go into the political conventions and somehow seek the nomination for the president of the United States. And he felt so arrogant and cocky about who he was, the general of the 7th Cavalry, that he boasted that there's not enough Indians in the world to take on the 7th Cavalry. That's one of his quotes. So he did. He put together a bunch of troops, a bunch of scouts, and then worked to track down those Native people who refused to be imprisoned on reservations. It was he who initiated this act of aggression. What the Lakota were doing, they were assembling for not just for battle. I mean, they weren't assembling for battle. They were assembling for what was going to be this massive gathering of Native peoples. And when I say massive, I'm talking about thousands, not tens of thousands, but thousands. And so when Custer attacked these guys with a combined number somewhere around 700, he was outnumbered. But it was he who thought with a surprise attack he could somehow deal some terrible blow to the Lakota. And of course, it didn't work out that way. He was killed along with if probably at least a third of that 700, maybe a little more of that, closer to half of that 700 of those 700 men were killed in the attempt to attack the Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse and others. There's there's conflicting reports on how many Native people died. It may have been as little as 30, and could have been as much as 150, but those records are not real accurate. But suffice to say that Custer was defeated soundly, and it was a victory for Native freedom, in the assertion and the resistance to imprisonment and subjugation by the United States. As good a day as that is, it's worth noting that within 15 years, both Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse would be dead. They would have been killed. Within that 15 years is when the massacre at Wounded Knee would take place. And so the U.S. and their 7th Cavalry would have their vengeance that would take place. And this took place. The Little Bighorn battle was 1876, and in 1890 is when the massacre at Wounded Knee would take place. I mean, this, and of course, Sitting Bull would be murdered, and Crazy Horse would be murdered. It's, I don't know. It's as much as it we can say with pride that Custer got what he deserved. It didn't end there, and so I do want to mention and celebrate that victory, but the victory is bittersweet. So anyway, I wanted to mention June 25th through the 26th. It was when Custer attacked the Lakota at Little Bighorn, and didn't go well for him. So anyway, let me get back on the subject matter that I wanted to talk about, this idea of Native people voting. First off, we don't represent a large enough population to affect any change in the in any election, really. I mean, with the possible exception of a few places where the Native people may represent a significant number in a very limited congressional district, which is a problem all by itself, but I'll get into that more. But for the most part, we're less than 0.7% of 1% of the population in the U.S. We're such a small population. They don't even need a gerrymander to make us irrelevant. I mean, I think about here in Seneca Territory. In Seneca Territory, the Seneca population, and I'm not even talking about the separation of the Senecas in Tonawanda, even the quote-unquote Seneca Nation, are divided into 3 counties. They're divided into several state legislative districts. They're divided into several congressional districts. So even the population of the Seneca Nation as a whole is already separated to have less significance. And again, Seneca elections, only a couple thousand people come out for those Seneca elections. And that's all the Senecas. Only a couple thousand. So you can't expect there to be more voter participation in the non-Native elections than in the Seneca elections. And when you take that 2,000 people, and understanding some of those people live in Buffalo and Niagara Falls, I mean, and of course some live in Cattaraugus, which is sliced up by the maps to they put those lines through our territories that say part of it is in one township or another township, part of it is in the Cattaraugus County, part of it's in Erie County, part of it is in Chautauqua County, and of course then you go down to Salamanca or Allegheny, and that's all Cattaraugus County as well, or considered that. Now, that doesn't get to the root of the problem, and the root of that problem has to do with just what I spoke of. What is our land? Is our land, and I'm not Seneca, so I'm asking the question of Senecas. Is Seneca land part of a non-Native township? Are they in the town of Collins or the town of Brant? Are they in Erie County or Cattaraugus County or Chautauqua County? I know there's, politically it still sure seems like it when you talk about the relationship the Seneca Nation has with the counties and with the state elected officials. But here's the reality. The reality is Seneca Territory is not part of a county or township. In fact, it's not part of New York State. And really, it's not a part of the United States. And that's a problem. I mean, that's a problem if you're going to try to suggest that this territory, which is absolute title to the Senecas. I mean, the Seneca Nation territories belong to the Seneca people. It is not deeded by New York State or the federal government. And in fact, again, I mention this all the time, but in Canandaigua, in the Canandaigua Treaty, the United States says 3 times about different Native territories that the United States recognized that the property is ours. and that they will never claim the same, nor will they disturb us in the free use and enjoyment of our lands, or the free use and enjoyment of our allies, our friends on our lands. So the United States in 1794 clearly acknowledges, forget the doctrine of Christian discovery and all of this, BS that has been spun out of the church and out of the courts and out of every place else, that somehow we didn't own our lands. The United States fully acknowledged that we owned our lands, whatever that means. Okay, they acknowledged that they didn't own it. In fact, they made it very clear that it is ours to sell if we choose to sell to them, and they claim to have some sort of exclusive right to buy the land from us if we choose to sell. But they fully acknowledged that our land was ours and not theirs. Not a part of the United States would never claim the same. Now, that's 1794. Even during the removal period, when Native people were being pushed west of the Mississippi, when the Senecas were asked to entertain the idea of going out west, the Senecas asked, well, how would that land be held? The United States was forced to come back to the Senecas to say, you would own the land the same as you do the land that you'd be leaving. And the United States would never claim the land. It would never become a part of the U.S. territory. It would never become a part of a state. So even in the 1830s, not just 1794, even in the 1830s, the United States was still saying, your land is yours, and we'd only pay you to take another piece of land that would be yours. Not that we would hold in trust for you, that we'd hold the title for you. No, it would be yours. And through the entire 19th century, there would always be a reminder, both in Albany and in Washington, D.C., especially as it related to us in our relationship with New York and the federal government, that our lands were ours, that they were not. In spite of all of the other things that were happening with Indian reorganization, well, that would actually come later, but all this effort to corral us and to imprison us. Look, our territories did decrease in size. We were defrauded out of millions and millions and millions of acres of land. But the lands that we retained, the lands that we still retain, there is no question that there's never been a time that New York State nor the federal government can claim the title to our lands. So, I bring this up for a very good reason. So how the hell can they put congressional districts through our territories if our territories are not part of the United States or New York State? Look, I know the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples advocates that we, as indigenous peoples, should have a right to vote in those elections. We should never be denied the right to vote. But, that's one of those provisions in the UN Declaration that I don't give a rat's ass about. I really don't. I think we are wrong to vote in their elections. And the reason I think we are wrong is because it's like sticking our head in their noose. Part of the whole idea of our autonomy and our free and independent existence is based on the fact that we are autonomous, that we are our own people. We have our own systems. We have our own land. Look, it's fine that we have interaction with the outside. Friends, neighbors, and commerce, trade. That we use their language predominantly. We use their currency. That's still not the same thing as us being theirs. But if we vote in their elections, we're saying that they represent us. And it gets worse. Because we're not just saying that their representatives represent. If we voted for them, again, if we participate in the system, we're saying that whole system represents us. But it gets worse. Because in order to register to vote in those elections, what we're saying is that our land, our addresses, our homes are within their congressional districts. We are conceding to them, it's not a title transfer, but the implications are clear that we are acquiescing. We are agreeing that they can consider our land in their legislative districts. Every native territory, every governing authority on every native land should be clear in saying, no, our territories are not a part of a congressional district. The Seneca Nation should be very, very clear. I mean, a few years back, I know Ross John told the U.S. attorney in a meeting with law enforcement, he told him, he says, you're not in the United States right here. You're meeting us here on the Allegheny territory of the Seneca Nation. You're not in the United States. You're on the lands of the Seneca people. And he tried to make that point clear. And the arrogance of the U.S. Attorney General, Kathy Hochul's husband, was that he was insulted. That somehow being told that he was not on U.S. soil was an insult to him. I mean, that's the arrogance that we deal with here. But I'll tell you, if we go and we take out a voter registration form and we put our address on the Cattaraugus territory or the Allegheny territory on that voter registration form and determine by that address which congressional district we're in, we're agreeing with that. We are complicit in that. We are suggesting as individuals, and you know what? And this is where, again, the Seneca Nation should say no. Look, New York, U.S., if you are letting our people vote in your elections, then that's fine. But make no mistake about it, our territories are not part of your congressional districts and your legislative districts. So how you reconcile that problem, that's your problem, because frankly, we would not advocate that our people vote in your elections. Not only, again, we can't impact those elections anyway. But here's the problem. And this is why I say, at least with prayer, you're not doing damage. With voting, you are. You're validating every bad decision they make, and you're conceding, even if you have no authority to do so, that your address, that they have some sort of congressional authority over. I mean, we can't ask the federal government or state government to legislate for us and then claim that they can't legislate over us. This is a problem. And our people just don't want to accept that. And, and as for these individuals who want to run for office, look, Paulette Jordan, Deb Haaland, I mean, any of these folks. It's a shame that you could not find within your own territories a place to really affect change. That instead, I mean, in the case of Paulette Jordan, Idaho is like the 7th whitest state in the United States. So if she could somehow become a Democratic, a Democrat, a party, an elected official from the Democrat Party to win the governorship of Idaho, which would be a pretty big lift considering how red a state it is, she'd be representing white people. I mean, even in Idaho, which has an above average from a state to state standpoint native population, the native population only is about 1.4% of the population in Idaho. So the rest of that population, 98.6% of the population, is non-native. So who do you think who's going to elect her? White people. So who does she serve? White people. I mean, there's no way that a native person can enter into a state race or a national race of any kind advocating native rights. You'll never get elected. Why? Because what we're fighting for is not the same. Is not what Americans want. I mean, maybe they want the same thing that we want, but they don't want it the same way. They want constitutional rights. They want their white privilege to stay in place. That's what they want. I'm not looking for equity within the U.S. Constitution. No, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for our autonomy and our free and independent existence to be acknowledged and to be embraced. And I don't need them to do that for us. I need us to do that. We need us to do that. So if we've got great leadership within our territories, what good does it do if that great leadership leaves us and goes and runs for state office or federal office? I mean, that's. I mean, I'd rather see some of these great leaders, if they are great leaders, male or female, lead our people, provide the their intellect and provide their diplomacy, provide their wisdom to our people. We don't belong voting in their elections. Now, here's my one concession to that. If you don't live on a native territory, if you live in the non-native communities, then yeah, your address is in a congressional district. And you know what? Maybe you can dance between the two worlds a little bit. But if you live on a native territory, you have no right to put on a piece of paper that your address is within a congressional district. And look, if the leadership, if the governing officials, if the whether it's traditional or elected or whatever else, if the Seneca Nation thinks it's fine that that several thousand Senecas put on paper that their lands, that their addresses are part of New York State, I don't know why they'd agree with that. But see, nobody frames the question that way. I've never heard anybody suggest that part of the reason that a Native person shouldn't vote in an election is because they have to be complicit in the claim of the state and federal government that our land is theirs. And that's just the bottom line. That's just the bottom line. But again, if you live in Buffalo, if you live in Niagara Falls, if you live in New York City, if you live in Syracuse, if you live in Rochester, yeah, your interests may be represented by those local elections and by those state elections and those national elections. But if you're Native, you've got to question. You have to come back to that question: are you a U.S. citizen, or are you a part of the Native people that you claim from time to time? So what are we? Are we full time or are we part time? Are we Americans? Are we U.S. citizens? Or are we Ongwe? Are we Onondawaga? Are we Onyotaaga? Are we Gunyakaaga? These are the questions we have to ask. Because if we vote in their elections, there's no question then. I mean, this is different than getting a driver's license. This is you fulfilling a civic responsibility in their political system that is carved out exclusively for U.S. citizens. So if you're voting in their elections, you're a U.S. citizen. You've claimed such. You've asserted such. So that's one problem. But if you're asserting that the land that you live on is theirs too, well, maybe that's not a problem if you live off of a native territory. Although we could argue, where do our territories really stop and start? That's a whole nother discussion. But I think if you're living specifically on a territory that is clearly understood to be a native community, and you are signing papers suggesting that those territories are in a state or federal legislative district, then I think that's a wrong thing to do. And I know how our land is held in the territories of the Haudenosaunee. I know it's a little bit different in some of those other territories, but where do you start drawing the line? But if you're a part of a get out the vote campaign on a native territory, then that's treasonous as far as I'm concerned. There's no way that our people should be advocating for voting in their elections, for registering our land as part of their congressional districts. There's no way that our people should be advocating for enlistment in selective service, the draft. And again, if we're living on a native territory specifically, and we claim to be of those people, then we shouldn't be running for their elected offices either. That's that's something I feel strongly about. But having said all that, I have to go back to the first hour of the program. There is much that we can do to affect those people who claim to represent others. I mean, even Native people, I still say we should give elected officials of the state and the federal government a piece of our mind. They should know how we feel about issues, and they should know how we feel about the things that they're doing, whether they're lying, whether they're cheating, whether they are discriminating, or whether they are abusing children, whether they're abusing their office in terms of sexual harassment and other things, accepting bribes, the corruption that surrounds guys like Andrew Cuomo and the people closest to him. We all have a right to call that out. Not because they are our elected officials, but we are impacted by the things that they do. We are impacted by the things that they say. We are impacted by their racism. We are impacted by their bigotry. We are impacted by the wars that they promote, by the economies that they destroy. We are impacted by all that stuff. So yes, we have a right to speak out, and more than a right, we have a responsibility to do that. So when somebody says, "Oh no, play nice. Let grace be your guide. Let civility be your guide," I say, hell no. Give them hell. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Yahweh.